Hi, this is Huritan with the Teacher Mentor Podcast. I'm joined today with Austin Cole, who is a school psychology doctoral candidate at the University of South Florida. Prior to joining the program, he was a high school counselor for 6 years, where he became a passionate advocate for all students, families, and teachers with a particular passion for supporting underserved families and students. This experience led to his thesis research on the accessibility of AP courses for underrepresented students. Currently, he is a graduate research assistant on 2 federally funded grant projects focused on increasing school safety through improving school-based threat management and comprehensive suicide prevention through screening and supporting. He is also a graduate teaching associate, teaching 2 sections of positive psychology in the school, a service learning general education course. Austin also has the experience advocating at the local, state, and federal levels for budget appropriation considerations and encouraging legislators to support or reject legislation directly affecting students, their families, and educators. He has served as president of the USF School Psychology Student Association, a Florida Association of School Psychologists Advocacy Student Liaison, a National Association of School Psychologists student leader. Currently, he serves as the Florida Association of School Psychologists Public Policy and Professional Relations Committee Chair and a National Association of School Psychologists Professional Positions Committee student member. Austin, it's good to have you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start today with, we were talking before we started to record about there is an awareness that my students are starting to come to, that college is an option for some, but it doesn't have to be an option for them. And the stigma may be diminishing. And a few years ago, I don't know if that conversation would have taken as openly. And I don't know if that is because of the pandemic, people began to see some things behind the scenes of school, or because maybe we are just becoming more open to the individual growth plans of people as a whole. Mm-hmm. But I'm starting to see anecdotally that students, and this is students in the classroom and then students that have left the classroom that I still connect with at some level, that those students have gone on and not necessarily the traditional 4-year college route, but they've gotten plugged in and they've gone to trade school, or they've gotten an associate degree in something they really like. They've got some type of certificate and they're doing life and they're loving it, and they're much happier than what they had told me was their plan when they were my student years and years ago, which was 4-year degree, and then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and this is the plan. So I wanted to talk about that, and later engagement versus disengagement, and just how the school focuses on that.
Yeah, that's a really important subject area to really think about. To kind of start off a little bit, and I mentioned this earlier, I'm a super passionate advocate and proponent of post-secondary education. Now, oftentimes we automatically assume that post-secondary education is college. Go straight to college. I'm a first-generation college student myself, which means I'm a first-generation graduate student. And so I see the difference that post-secondary education can make in my own life and the direction I'm going. Now, what I want to say is that post-secondary education doesn't have to automatically equal college, right? What I encourage students is to be lifelong learners. Don't get that 12th grade diploma, finish high school, and say, I'm done. All it is work from here on. Be lifelong learners. So whatever path you're deciding to take, keep going after high school, whether that's like career and tech school, some certification courses, some kind of licensure courses, or if that's college. They're all pathways to the ultimate goal of continued growth. And so I am a huge proponent of post-secondary education. Just keep growing, never stop doing that. Because the moment we stop growing, we start dying. Academically, mentally, physically, if we're not growing, we're dying. And so I am a huge proponent of post-secondary education, whatever form that looks like for students.
Why do you think do you think the school systems, I'm not saying all school systems do this, but why is there a pushback or a hesitation to really include post-secondary education? Like when I was in high school, we would just call it VOTEC. Why is that considered less than like a traditional four-year university? When you begin to look at the metrics, like a post-secondary is financially much more reasonable. They have a higher job placement rating than most universities do, like 95, 96% or something like this,
Yeah.
right?
And
So
typically a higher starting salary too.
yeah, and so if for our culture that really defines success through those metrics, right? It's what do you do, your job, how much do you make is usually kind of implied in that. So like when I'm talking to someone else and I say I'm in education, like they know within a certain range, like, right? So you've got the job and you've got the salary, and then you've got, maybe I guess some degree of status that's kind of implied in there. Like, so when you're talking to, a medical doctor, for example, like there's a certain kind of like, oh, he's a doctor, or that type of thing, which implies that includes the financial component of being a doctor, right? And they've gone to school, which is that other component of they've gotten education. So why do you think there is, when school districts are talking about educational opportunities and pathways, why is there just a hesitation to give them something that clearly could be very beneficial to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know data and research as to why that is. But in my experience, there's a couple of things that this makes me really think about. One, in a school setting, the people who are interacting with students, teaching students, guiding students, all of these positions in school, they're all college graduates, every one of them.
Mm.
And a lot of them have their graduate degrees, master's degrees, doctoral degrees, whatever that is. And so for a lot of these educators, that was my path. What other path would you even consider?
Okay.
This is what pushed me through to get to this point. This is just the natural progression because it's what we did. It's what everybody does, right? And so I think there's the part of it of you're in this crowd of college educated individuals who said it was good for me. It'll be good for you. It's just the natural pathway. I think another part of it has kind of come about with the accessibility of a college education. There was a time when it was manufacturing, it was agriculture, it was all these industries. And if you wanted out of that position, out of that situation to earn more money, education was the pathway out. And so as colleges started becoming more accessible, that was your ticket to a different life. And so there was a lot of really good marketing of college kind of being that way out. Mm. And so we've continued that trend saying, if you want to, like I said, elevate your status, if you want to have higher earning potentials, if you want to get out of working with your hands and getting your knees dirty and stuff, get a college education. And so that's been like this huge marketing campaign for decades, propping up college education as that pathway out. And again, I think there's a huge value in college education, but it's not a pathway that makes sense for every single person based off of values, based off of goals, based off just this autonomous sense of what I want to do with life. Yeah. And so by pushing it, you've really isolated those who that's not in their long-term goals. Well, now I'm not worth as much because I didn't go to college. Yeah. I didn't even want to go to college. It's not that I didn't get in. I didn't want that for my life. I wanted something else. But now I'm made to feel less. Or they get pushed into college anyway, not aligning with their goals, with their desires, with their values or anything. And they either end up dropping out halfway through with this feeling, the stigma of a college dropout now and the negativity that comes with that. Or they finish and they're not happy in these jobs that they thought were promised were going to pay well, but that entry level wage isn't what they thought it was going to be. And so they're stuck in this job that they didn't want in the first place, earning an income that's lower than they expected. And now they're kind of stuck, right? And so we see a lot of these individuals who graduated college and are 5, 10 years into a career completely stop that career, go to some kind of trade or certification, and totally transition their life and say, I wish I had done this a long time ago.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I think within our school system, we market it because that was the ticket out. And because we all did it, why would you not?
Yeah. The district that I'm at, they are implementing more of a, I don't know what the program's name is, but they have a program that is, it's geared towards college applications where you can submit everything through there, but they have a lot of career personal inventory. And that caught my eye because I'm like, that would be something that would be good to really allow students to play around with, because the expectation that students at 17, 18, 16, right, they make these lifelong decisions, right? I mean, if you have a 17 or 18-year-old and they come to you and say, hey, I'm going to get married. I just, found this person. They seem to be great. I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to get married. Most people would say, whoa, let's slow down. Let's talk through. And yet what they're doing is they're marrying into the idea of college, and it's a large financial commitment that they're going to have to pay back unless they have the scholarships for it. But even still, depending on the program, depending on what they want, like they're making a financial decision that is going to impact not only them but their spouse, their livelihood down the road. So I know you don't have the data for it. It would be interesting if we ever tracked data at the K-12 level to see if, like, are our students happy? Like, I was reading a research finding, and they were talking about the connection between happiness and salary, and they were talking about how I think it's over $150,000. Like, the happiness quotient really doesn't change. Like, now there's a huge difference between, let's say 50 and 150,000, because when you do that, then the day-to-day struggles, the living paycheck to paycheck, like that's not as much of a problem now for you. But in our mindset, for those individuals that are at the lower end, we think the more money that you get, you're going to be happier. And yet qualitatively, it doesn't seem to pan out that way. And yet at the school system, it seems like we're pushing for these metrics that other researchers are going, yeah, but it doesn't necessarily equal happiness. And the kids are caught in the middle.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I read an older study that parallels exactly what you said. And it's one I used in my class. And I think the numbers are different because of the cost of living has gone up, inflation has gone up, and so on. But this study was looking at 75,000 as being kind of that golden number. Up from 20 to 75,000, there's a huge difference in life satisfaction. And that correlates with that basic needs, right? Once you get to that cost of living threshold, the day-to-day bills, the stress of getting food, all that stuff kind of melts away a little bit, and you feel more comfortable. So you're not worried about the survival needs. You're able to enjoy and have that satisfaction. But once you go above that, 2 million, 3 million, a billion, whatever that is, there's really no difference in quality of satisfaction. It's kind of the same satisfaction level beyond that, because those survival basic needs have been met at that level. And that's really where our satisfaction plays in, is, do I feel like my needs have been met? We all want to play, right? We all want vacations. We all want our toys. We want our houses, our cars, and everything like that. But our satisfaction doesn't greatly change with all the toys. It changes based on whether our needs are met. And that goes back to talking about the kids we're working with. Their satisfaction with school, with home, with friends, with family, by and large depends on, are their needs being met?
Right.
So I think as a school system, what we need to start focusing on, rather than, looking at these long-term goals and kind of funneling everybody into what we think is going to be best for them, identifying what are their needs and how can we as an educational system meet those needs while we teach them the things that we want to teach them.
Yeah. As you're saying this, I'm thinking about someone listening that has um, a different opinion, in the sense that they think, yes, but how can we add that to, like, how is that going to be measured on a test, or how is that going to impact, for an administrator, how is that going to move me and my test scores up? And I see it as, if you can fill the hole, in the kid that there is not being met, through engagement or hope, or through those type of intangibles, if you will, right? Then I think that they'll come to school, and they'll be eager, and they'll like to come to school. I used to joke with my students, like, if they had the best breakfast ever, right? How many of our students do you think would go and take that food, right? Because for some of them, it's not the idea of food. It's just not their thing, right? But if it was whatever you wanted, well, then I think you probably cut down on the truancy, because students are like, well, I'm gonna get a really good meal today, and then I'm gonna get I'm gonna get the food I want, and I'm gonna have a good day. And so just that whole mindset shifts, and it's not a standard. It's not they're gonna go to Mr. Herndon's class and get the best ELA instruction ever. It's like, I'm getting the need that's being met, and that's the intangible. It's the food.
Yes.
And so I think in our conversation, for those individuals that may be listening that think that the conversation is, I don't know, too hypothetical, I think if we can understand that those students are coming already into our system, and they have a need, and we're not meeting that need, but we can meet both needs. We can meet the testing need. We can meet those metrics that the school system seems to thrive on, which they hate it, but they love it at the same time, right? Because it gives them a little bit of bragging rights among other districts or states, right? So it's a catch-22.
Just to jump in and interject, sorry to cut you off.
No.
I wanted to add in, it's really easy for us to think of this in terms of physiological needs, right? You sit down to take the SAT or the GRE or the teacher certification exam, whatever exam you're sitting down to, you sit down and take that without having eaten the past 2 days. How much are you going to be able to engage with and be interested in the exam with your stomach rumbling, right? We know that decreases our engagement, that decreases our interest, and it decreases our cognitive abilities because we're hungry. It's easy to think of it when it's a physical need. If my leg is in pain because I broke it on the way into class, how much am I going to engage with the class? I'm not. So when we have these physical needs, it's easy for us to be like, well, yeah, that's going to affect your learning, obviously. That's why we have breakfast and lunch at school. That's why we offer snacks. When we sit down to take the AC or the AP exams at the end of the year, often teachers will bring in a big breakfast for the students because they know that a full tummy correlates with better exam scores because there's not that physiological need, right?
Yeah.
But it gets harder for us when we look at social needs, emotional needs, mental health needs, feelings of hope and competence, because we can't see those. We don't hear the stomach rumbling when there's an emotional need. We don't always see the tears sobbing when there's a social emotional need. We don't always see that. And so we say, how is that going to improve my test scores? Because I can't actually see that need. Yeah. But the research really shows us that those needs are as correlated with achievement scores as any physical need is as well. And so as we meet those needs, it's almost an automatic boost. We don't have to change much of our instruction practices. But if we start meeting some of these needs, it's going to be an automatic boost in our test scores and our achievement scores.
That's good that you say that, because I know as a classroom teacher, it seems over the years, the amount of ancillary responsibilities in addition to instruction. And so I could easily see a teacher going, so now I have to be an emotional counselor. I have to be a mental health expert, which we already deal with. I mean, the kid comes in, they've just broken up with someone, to them, it is the end of the world, right? They will never love again, at 14, their life is just is over, or you may have something that's, you know, more more grounded. It could just be a bad night at home with mom and dad. Parents could be going through a divorce. So we already deal with a lot of those, and I can see where the teacher may be a little bit more reserved in the idea of shouldering that. I think what we need to have is an institution that allows a little bit more freedom to engage in these social. And I'm not sure, even as a parent, I go, yeah, but there are some teachers, I just don't know what they're going to say and what they're going to. And I think at the heart of this podcast, it's not only bringing the professionalism, but bringing the credibility back to the profession. Yeah. And that's where, you hire the right teachers, you hire the right individuals to say, I'm educating the whole. And I forget where I was listening to this podcast, but they were talking about education, and in the Latin, it actually means to draw out. Mm-hmm. And so we have, and the mindset, I think, of a lot of people that education is instilling, right?
Right.
And it's hard to do that when they don't want to learn because they've got, they're disengaged because of whatever factor that they are disengaged with. And to your point, I think it's a lot easier to draw them out if we can meet some of these needs. Absolutely. And so to the teachers or to the administrators that are a little hesitant on this, I'm not asking for or thinking or presenting the idea that we add more responsibility to them to teach these. And this has happened where I have had classes or sessions or years where they do try this and they add it into the normal classroom instructional session, and there's pushback from faculty because they're not necessarily skilled. That may not be their mindset or, their personal belief. Like they may not adopt with it, and they may not, think it's that important, or, so there are a lot of factors at play, obviously. But I think if we can start to address the social issues of the student and actually begin to consider them, like what's in their best interest, then I think it's going to have that tangible result that the educator, that the administrator says, yes, but how is this going to help me with my test score? How is this going to help? I think that will just naturally carry through, just like your analogy about feeding them before a test.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you kind of bringing up what this might look like in a classroom, right? Because teachers are way overburdened. And it seems like every year after the new legislative session has finished, there's more educational rules and stuff that you have to do as a classroom teacher. You have to monitor, you have to report, you have to make sure you're progress monitoring and collecting your data and reporting your data. There's so many requirements on a teacher that it's overwhelming. And I think that's where we see a lot of this burnout, because we're not seeing the connection between why am I doing all of this and how is it helping my students? Yeah. Most teachers get into this job for the money. I'm kidding. Most teachers get into this job because they care about helping students. Mm-hmm. They see the possibility of what they can give to students. And so they get into the classroom and they're ready to, be that inspirational teacher where at the end of the semester, the kids stand up on the desk and say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," right? That's what we want as teachers. That is our ultimate goal, to get from our students, to evoke from them, to draw out from them this passion, this love for learning, and this awesome growth. And then we get saddled with all of these things we have to do, from progress monitoring to grading to teaching for the test. Because if your students don't score well on a test, that's going to be reflected onto you. Mm-hmm. And now we don't have time to be an inspirational teacher because we have all this curriculum we have to get through before the test happens. And then it becomes a robotic, rote job where you're reading a script to a class, hoping they're absorbing it, and then they regurgitate it onto the paper at the end of the semester. I think that's where we're seeing a lot of our burnout. And don't get me wrong, a lot of this stuff is important, right? It's important to progress monitor. How do you know if there's changes if we're not monitoring the changes, right? A lot of it is important, but a lot of it is we're not seeing that connect between it and what it's doing for our students. So what I want to say is what we're talking about here, meeting some of these social and emotional needs, doesn't have to be a 10, 15-minute addition to the curriculum for the day.
Mhm.
When kids first start learning, way as little babies, right, in the early developmental stages, their number one way of learning is modeling. They watch adult behavior and then they mimic adult behavior. That doesn't stop as kids go into school. Through kindergarten all the way
Yeah.
through 12th grade, they still mimic adult behavior. And that's why you have seniors who are like, I can't wait till I'm an adult. They're mimicking the behavior, but then they get punished for mimicking behavior because they're not quite adults yet, right?
Yeah.
And so they mimic behavior. So in a classroom, what this can look like is showing empathy to a student.
Yeah.
Not taking time out of your curriculum, but recognizing a student struggling with it and be like, hey, I noticed that this is a little bit harder for you. Let's see if we can practice through it just a little bit more. Or recognizing that a student has their head down, and instead of an instant discipline measure or reprimand, recognize that there might be something bigger happening and they're exhausted, and seeing what you can do to support that student rather than be punitive. When you think back about the teachers who are most impactful in your education, you don't think about the ones who taught really well so you could pass the test. You think of the ones who cared.
Yeah, the
ones
relation.
who took a moment to form a relationship with you.
Yeah.
In my thesis research, I interviewed a bunch of students and asked them about tell me about a time when you felt a teacher really cared and supported you. And it was always the teachers who took one moment and said, how are you doing? To make it a little even easier than that, sometimes all it takes is standing at your doorway and greeting students as they come in.
Yeah, I was
That
just
smile, that hello, that high five, all of that starts forming those relationships, and you start meeting those needs for a lot of these students who don't have that adult connection.
I was just going to say that because when I have interns, one of the first things that I like to do is they usually come in very eager, and funny enough, even though they've been through the public school system, the majority of them, they have that Dead Poet Society. Like I expect after my first day for them to stand on the, you know, cheaply constructed furniture and yell out, "Oh, Captain, like Captain," right, and to be carried off, right. And then by the end of the day, they're going, "Oh," and there's like this kind of like, it's like going on a blind date and you're expecting this, and then and then you're like, "Oh," and it's like, yeah, but the other person was expecting this and they got you too, so it's even, right? So I have them stand at the door, and I've done this, I don't know, for years, but I'll greet them. I'll say good morning to every student if I can that goes through, so repetitively, right? And one thing that I've noticed over the last few years is the engagement back has diminished from students. So sometimes I'll get morning, sometimes I'll get morning, and sometimes I wouldn't even get a nod. Like they'll just, just kind of go in, and I'll ask the student or ask the intern, what do you notice about that? What does that tell you? Are they disengaged? Like they didn't hear me, they had their AirPods in? Or are they not used to that? Are they responding because they've been raised to have some type of just polite discourse? Someone says something to you, you nod, you do something to acknowledge it, but you don't have to, and I think it does set the tone. And I've even tried personally to, when people ask me in the morning, how are you, to give them an answer that's, even if I'm not in that moment, perhaps feeling like great, like positive, because I'm really tired of just individuals always being low, not low energy, but just low in spirit. And I'm like, but you model this for your students. So when you come into work and you're just, work, I can't wait till Friday. And it's like, okay. Then I'm like, well, they're going to feel that, and they're going to replicate that for the next 6 periods in their day. And then you wonder why they are misbehaving in your class, because to some degree you've modeled and said it's okay to be frustrated. Not to say that I'm perfect at that, or I haven't, but I'm like, I'm starting to see these patterns that my energy dictates so much of the classroom energy for a majority, not all, right? The bell curve of students, right? But in that bell curve, I can do a lot of good if I can just get my perspective right.
Yeah. And, I think what we're seeing here is a huge cohort of students who, when they look outside of the school, they see a bunch of chaos, decreased hope for a future. They're all really kind of teared and hanging on for dear life. They've grown up watching some of these post-apocalyptic movies, and they've enjoyed them. Like, man, can you imagine if things went like that? And they lived through periods that almost mirrored what some of these post-apocalyptic movies were. They lived through that. And here we are, where there's just an incredible amount of unrest, no matter where you turn, whether it's at home, in our country, or internationally. There's just an intense amount of unrest and discord and chaos. And so we want them to come onto our campus and learn about English and math and science, when they turn around and look outside the school doors at an entire world that's erupted in chaos right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we say, how are we supposed to get them to care about Shakespeare or the Pythagorean theorem?
Oh, yeah.
How do you say that? I'm not a math person. Geometry, or how these two chemicals interact together. How do we get them to care about that when real life is still happening outside?
Yeah.
Right? And so there's an amount of affirmation that has to happen, validation. Like, you all are struggling right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard world. And here we're asking you to learn about stuff that doesn't seem quite relevant. But the stuff you're learning here can help you when you graduate to change things, to turn them around. You don't like the way things are going, learn stuff and make that difference.
Yeah.
And then we start building in some hope, right? Asking the kids, what do you want for your future? Like you mentioned, vision casting out, right? 10 years from now, if everything goes according to your plan, what does that look like? Help them see a future, and then build in those pathways and smaller goals to show how sitting in this class right now, even though it doesn't feel like it's relevant to what's happening outside, this is helping you on your pathway to your goal that is going to change things, that's going to turn things around.
Yeah.
And you create that hope, and that hope then feeds back into that engagement. What I find we have a hard time doing, and starting back in kindergarten, is helping students identify the concept of hope and a future. All right. And of course, kindergartners, their future is going to be, I hope I get snacks when I get home. Right. Because that's their developmental context. Yeah. But if we start training on what's a hope for the future, as we get to high schoolers, we're starting to get these complex thoughts of a future and identifying how everything we do right now, as menial and trivial as it seems, is part of a pathway to a greater goal that I'm reaching for. That can create that engagement as well. And that comes from once they get to us, because obviously the students you're seeing in your classroom have had 8+ years of standard education. So you're getting them now without that hope building process. And it really starts with that validation of, it's hard right now.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's hard for me too.
You said when I get them now, and I was thinking to myself, I wasn't an elementary ed major, or I didn't do anything with elementary. But I would think, just from picking up my kids at school, that the number of kids statistically that go to school at kindergarten or first grade that are sad or relatively low. And I think it's the process of school that kind of just takes that hope away. Yeah. And you were talking about vision casting, and we had spoke earlier, and I got the name of the guy. His name was Dr. Joe Diaspora, I think is how it's pronounced. And he was talking about how they are now able to measure and see memories in the brain, right? Yeah. And they're able to see it kind of just form on however it's measured, right? Well, he was comparing that to individuals that meditate, and he says, and medicine for a long time, meditate was a hippie term. It had a lot of fluff that was associated with it. And he was saying, no, I'm talking about just thinking about an event that has yet to happen that you would like to happen, right? So in some ways, like vision casting. And he was talking about a study in which they compared the results of the brain scan for people that were just looking at a memory and those that were meditating or vision casting on like their perfect day. And they were identical. And he said the brain can't tell the difference between a memory and a vision cast, a meditation that has been so ingrained that the brain doesn't know which one is the same, and they look identical to the outside. So you can retrain, you can repurpose your mind to have that. And I think that's one of the things that we can do to students is we can tell them that you can retrain yourself to have that hope, and to envision something for themselves, because the engagement is not there now. I mean, we can look at poll after poll after poll among faculty and staff and schools as well. The engagement's not there, because if the engagement's not there at this level, then telling them to go to more school, to kind of dovetail to our beginning topic, then you can see why the college enrollment numbers are starting to dip. And there's conversations about, is college really right for everyone? And what does that mean if I don't go to college? Is that a reflection of me? Is that a reflection of my academic skill or my intellect? Or maybe it's not that at all. Maybe it's just you have your own definition, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I love that you brought us back to that. What we found in a lot of research is that life satisfaction goes up. I say it goes up. It's pretty stable, but high through elementary school. So from birth through elementary school, life satisfaction is pretty high. Right when they get to about middle school, like 11, 12 years old, we start seeing it drop. And it continues to drop through middle school and high school. And after high school, it stabilizes again. What's also interesting is looking at motivation, internal motivation. What's driving me is high in elementary school, and right about 11 or 12 years old, starts dropping down through middle school, keeps dropping down through high school, and stabilizes again after high school. Now, satisfaction and motivation are so heavily correlated that if you have low satisfaction, you're most likely going to have low motivation. And vice versa, if you have low motivation, you're more likely to have lower life satisfaction, a drive, a purpose, something inside you that says move, right? Yeah. And so it's almost like as we get into middle school, and there's, a big part of it's biological development, right?
Yeah.
Puberty, hormones, we start fearing for the future, anxiety comes in, and then we have to start thinking about what we're going to do for a career, and it's very stressful, and there's major life changes. So all of that plays into it. But there's also a component of the way we do school starting in middle school, where instead of learning basic skills, we're implementing those skills to learn, right? So elementary school, you learn to read. And then when you get to middle school, you start reading to learn. We shift it. Mm-hmm. So you develop those basic skills. When we get to middle school, a lot of students still haven't mastered those basic skills. And so they become more disengaged. They feel worse about themselves because they're not able to keep up with the reading to learn. And they disengage from the classes. Their satisfaction goes down. I can't read anyway, so I'm going to stop being motivated to do my work. And we see strong correlations between reading and referrals, discipline, dropout, and contact with law enforcement. So there's some emphasis that needs to be placed on building up those skills in elementary school. But there's also the way we teach in middle and high school that's more about shoveling information in rather than building up self-competence. So self-determination theory says that individuals have 3 basic psychological needs. They need to feel a sense of competence. They're capable of doing, what is that? You see that? That's wild. They have a sense that they're able to do it. They have the skills necessary. Then they need to feel like they're in control. They have autonomy. I don't know what this is. So they need to feel like they have autonomy. They are self-directed. And then they need relatedness. They need that interpersonal connection.
Yeah.
And so when we get to middle school, we start telling them, you just learn. Be quiet, sit in your seat, learn. And so we take away their competence. We take away their autonomy. And because in elementary school, everything's fun and happy and playful, and we have story time and stuff, we get to middle school, it's all sit in your desk, pull out your work, listen to the teacher, do your homework. We start losing that relatedness. And so we see those psychological needs being less and less important as you go through middle and high school. And then we get kids in high school who are completely disconnected because I don't feel like I'm capable. I don't have any control over my future, that learned helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel so isolated from my community that what's the point? And then we see this spike in mental health issues and we get concerned, and why is this happening? And again, there's a lot of factors that play into it. And this is just one factor that influences it. But that's one factor we as an education system can address. We can't change their home situation.
Right.
We can't change their community environment. We can't change the world. But we can focus on what we can do in schools. Then that translates into college. We've taken away all of their autonomy and their motivation, their feeling of competence. And now we say, now you get to go to college.
And learn on your own.
And learn on your own. Because we believe in you, right? And so often these students who might otherwise, based off of values, goals, what they want to do with their life, would rather not go to college and choose another pathway that would probably be more beneficial for their life satisfaction, because they've been told what they're going to do up until now. Someone says, you're going to go to college. I guess I'm going to college. And then we see lower life satisfaction through college as well.
Yeah.
Because they're channeled in that direction because we haven't developed that autonomy and competence.
Yeah. When you were talking and you talked about learned helplessness, I was talking to you earlier, and I think it was Dr. Peterson was talking about learned helplessness as it relates to working with elderly patients and not doing, I guess the rule of thumb is you don't do anything for a patient that they can do for themselves, because then they'll begin to decrease in that skill or proficiency and they will learn helplessness. And I think to some degree we have in education a learned helplessness mentality when it comes to some of the policies and procedures that we have. And so when you talked about middle school, and there needs to be a shift too. I mean, just from instructional, like I can see the middle school teachers going, that's not all we do. We are very engaged, right? You know, we don't always just sit there, but there at some level, there has to have a different format of instruction because you get more complex, right? So you can always do activities. Sometimes you need to have the expert in the room.
For sure.
Can just transmit that information. But I think we coddle to some degree so that we can get the results that we want, and then we expect them to have learned all of these life skills. Really, I mean, it's not just content related or subject related, but how do you learn math on your own when you're in high school? Well, the same way that you're going to learn it in college if you decide to go to college. I mean, the professor is going to be there, but they're going to give you the steps and the processes, and they're going to say, I'll see you next week, have everything done, and you're going, aren't you going to teach me how? And it's like, well,
right.
No, that's part of learning. You learn to do it, you do it on your own. And then you had mentioned something else about vision casting, and Pearson was talking about first generation students in college, and he had a self-authoring program. And so I forget the statistic, but it was something crazy, like 70 to 80% success rate of keeping in college on first generation just by having a few weeks of intentional conversations and having them like write out, like, what do you want to get out of this? What is your goal in this? Because you have individuals, especially in public education, I think there's also this assumption that college is just kind of everyone has some college
Right.
experience, right? So it's because you make it more accessible, and so if it's more accessible, everyone has college, right? Everyone, has a cell phone. Everyone's got a degree. Well, not necessarily. You may come from a family where education is valued, but it's not accessible in the
Right.
same way, right? So then you have a first generation um, going to college, and they don't have the infrastructure in place at home. They don't have a system that has adequately prepared them for the individual
Mhm.
responsibility of learning. And then you couple that with no ownership over their education, and you wonder why they're not successful
Yeah.
when they could be. When they could find a program or a course of study at a university that they really like. And I just thought that was interesting that it just took, I forget the parameters, but I'm going to say it was just a few weeks of intentional discussion with what do you want to get out of this? And I thought, okay, so they're having this success at the collegiate level. Like, why
Mhm.
would we not have this same success at the high school or middle school? Like, what do you want to get out of your time in school? Because I mean, the reality is when they're 16, they can drop out with a parent's permission, and that has happened. I've been
Mhm.
around long enough to have students say, "I'm just dropping out," and you've got parents that are upset about the decision, and then I've got parents that have, I don't care, as long as he gets the job, he's on his own, he can do it. But why we don't have that ownership component, that conversation that says, okay, in 5 years you could drop out of school, and then what's your plan? What do you
Yeah.
plan to do?
Yeah. And you brought up a lot of really good points there. And I think a key piece of what we're missing in schools is this idea that if a student struggles, the it's punitive for a teacher. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's incentivizing for the teacher to, as you said, like coddle the student and carry them through and pass them on so that it's not punitive on the teacher. They get the kid passed, so we're good to go. And
Yeah,
it's not focused on, and I'm not saying that it's bad teachers who do this. It's teachers who are working within a system that has been structured against them, right?
yeah,
And so they're doing the best they can to survive and do what they can for the kids within a system that's been created that's made it really hard to be a teacher.
it is, because you've got, let me just interrupt real quick,
Sure.
because you've
Yeah.
got administrative goals at any school, right? You've got an expectation that if, like, you're teaching, like, let's say an advanced course, AP kids, there is an expectation that those kids, and it could be from the kids themselves, right? I'm an AP student, so I don't get anything less than an A.
Right.
From the parents, right? Why does my student have an 87?
Mhm.
Um, and I've had to really work with my students, and one, just kind of telling them about the bell curve. Like, the idea of a bell curve is the fact that it's okay if you get a B. Like, if you look at the little description on the report cards, a B is above
Yeah.
average. And I was just reading an article, and they were talking about, I think it was Yale and Harvard. They had something like 79, 80% all get A's, right? And so they're worried about the grade inflation at
Sure.
these universities. And I'm like, the A only has merit because of the F. Like, you have to have some distribution curve,
Right.
right? And so for those overachievers, sometimes the best you're going to get is a B, but it's a well-earned B. And I
Totally.
think that pressure for the teacher to perform is
Yep.
so multi-layered, because you have teachers that want to say, you haven't mastered the standard. I'm not punishing you, but you haven't written this essay to the standard in which you are capable of, or that you should,
Right.
right? But you've got all of these layers and expectations, and I mean, you're given a list at the end of the quarter of how many D's, how many C's you have, how many F's you have, and it's kind of understood, like, what are you doing to work with these kids,
Mhm.
and sometimes I'm like, C's and B's are okay, like, it's
Yeah.
okay, like, everyone shouldn't get an A.
And that's, I think, one of the strong weaknesses of a letter grade system, right? It's not about evaluative feedback for growth. It's I'm assigning you an award for the work based off how I feel your work has been done, right? And so we try to, again, within the system we're in, we try to use it to be evaluative and help promote growth and give good feedback. But at the end of the day, a student says, an A, I won, I got first place. A B, well, if you're not first, you're last, right? And so they don't see it as that growth feedback. It's a more of a punitive feedback with letter grade system. And so really adjusting our mentality, and it's hard because the system is set up for performance. That's what all of our metrics are based off, is performance. Are they performing at grade level? Are they performing at standard? Are they meeting these performance outcomes? When what we found is there's higher life satisfaction and decreases in learned helplessness and increases in autonomy and feelings of competence when we look more at mastery. Do you know the material? Not are you able to regurgitate it quickly on a test and get an A, but do you know it? Have you mastered it? Have you critically thought about it and identified different perspectives about it? Have you absorbed it and been a part of it and let it kind of breathe through you to master the content rather than be able to rehearse it real quick and repeat it back, and now you get an A, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a researcher along with Martin Seligman who kind of founded positive psychology. His name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's a really long name. It's taken me a lot of time to practice it, to be fluid in it. But what he researched was this state of flow. He called it a flow state. And that's where the level of challenge is just below the level of skill. So you're pushing students to the brink of feeling overwhelmed, but they have the skill to meet the challenge. Because if you push the challenge over their skill, they get overwhelmed and they shut down, right? Or what we see with a lot of our advanced students, the challenge is down here, their skills up here, they get bored, they disengage, and they fail classes, right? And so that state where the challenge is high, but your skill is just incrementally above it, that's where that sweet spot for learning exists. And students actually enter a state like time flies when you're having fun. They enter a state of total feelings of competence and autonomy, and they have the ability to master whatever the challenge is. And that sweet spot is kind of what we look for to pull students out of that state of learned helplessness, where they're spoon-fed. And another component of that learned helplessness, which was investigated by Martin Seligman, is this sense that I don't have any control over my future, my direction, or my environment. So I'm just going to sit down and take whatever comes my way. And then you have the students who walk in your classroom and you say, good morning, like, whatever, right? Yeah. They've been so boxed in and given this feeling that they don't have any competence or autonomy or any kind of mastery over their direction, that they just sit back and they coast through school, they pass. And that's where we get these high disengagement rates, even if graduation rates are high, right? They're doing the bare minimum to scrape by, or they're being passed through, but they're completely disengaged. They have no motivation or direction for their own lives. And that's an environmental pressure that has been put on them. It's a pressure cooker that they're in, and they're just completely defeated at this point. And so it's us, the onus is on us as a system to start reversing that around and boosting competence and autonomy rather than continuing to spoon-fed and push through and say, you're going to college, you're not going to college, right? But building that competence and autonomy so that it's actually their choice, what they feel is best for their lives and their direction. They can choose that. And when you give them what they need to have that sense of competence and autonomy, oddly enough, they do make really good decisions because they feel competent to do it and they feel like they have that direction. And then they actually ask for support and guide. Hey, I'm thinking about this. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah.
And they make really good decisions.
Yeah, that's happened a couple of times recently where I've had students post-graduation reach out. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that's the tangible, or rather, that's the intangible benefits of this career when you really know that you've connected or earned, right, that ability to speak in to someone else as they make these decisions, if it's
Yeah.
college or a career or things like this. I
And
want to,
just to interject really quickly, really quick story. This is how easy this kind of a process can be, that it doesn't take a whole lot of extra effort on your part as an educator, counselor, administrator, whatever it is. I've had several students, now that I'm outside of the schools, I'm no longer working in the school as a counselor. I've run into students in like different shopping areas and that kind of stuff. And they'll call out to me, Mr. Cool, is that you? I'm like, yeah, I don't remember who you are at all.
mm-hmm.
And they'll come up to me and say, it's because of you. If it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't be here today.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know them. I don't remember having any kind of lengthy interaction. But what I did on campus is I would each day, almost every day, walk through the hallways, just say hi to kids, peek in through classroom doorways, make faces at students, just being present and someone who is approachable. Yeah. That's how easy it is to start facilitating that relatedness, which feeds into feelings of autonomy and competence.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And that mirrors, I mean, I've had those same interactions, and it does help you in those days where you are feeling professionally just invalidated or frustrated, or you're going through your own, issues and things like this. I wanted to come back to the idea. I'm not, and I don't think we are talking about that metrics in and of themselves or are not valid or they're not reason. Like, I think testing obviously serves a purpose, because I think to some degree there's an accountability measure that we as the educators have invited upon ourselves over 30, 40 years, that we need to make sure that there is accountability, transparency when it comes to the resources, taxpayers, and things like this. But
for sure,
I think measuring the student only by the test or the ultimate destination of where they go post high school really just it not only infuriates the teachers, because there are the teachers out there that are just trying to instill just love, awareness for, you're going to get through this. It's not that big of a deal. And now let me teach you my lesson on Shakespeare and why he's so relatable, 400 years after he died. Like, why are we still reading his text? Because his text, even though it sounds archaic or confusing, like, it's the life issues that we're going through. It's the desires, it's the ambition, it's the pull for wanting more when you have this, but this is not enough. I want more. I want her. Or I don't want her. And so I don't want anyone to listen to this to think that we're diminishing testing. I just think that we are so fixated in so many metrics of the school's success are dependent on the test or dependent on some type of hard data, that it puts an unrealistic expectation on the whole system as a whole. Because if you have conversations with administrators or key leadership off the record, if you will, they'll agree with you 90% of the time that the system is flawed in this way, but there's not really a way to change it. And it just takes a few key stakeholders to say, no, we're going to do things differently, and let's just see what happens. I was just reading, I just read so much, I don't remember the name, but I think it was a university out west, and they're getting rid of the D's and the F's and they're just gonna, if you get a D or an F, you're going to get no credit for it. And what they realized is that a D or a F was proportional to unenrollment. So students that got higher D's and F's ended up unenrolling from the university. And so there were some individuals, of course, that were saying, well, this is just a way for the university to ensure that there's enrollment numbers, right? But the university talks about mastery of skill. Like, if they don't have a mastery of skill, which would correlate to a C, right? That's average. You have some proficiency with this skill or with this concept, right? Then you haven't learned the material, right? And And a university level, like you might be able to get away with the idea of a no credit, but at least it's a I think a move in the right direction. To the goal is not the GPA, like it's not punitive. Like when they get the NC, it doesn't impact their GPA. It just says you need to take this again, and
Yeah.
I don't know all of the specifics if they have to take more, because some universities will charge you more if you fail a class and then you take it again, so then they charge you a higher rate for that particular class. But it's a move in the right direction that we reframe sometimes doing something over again. Like when you were talking about the flow, I was thinking about the term like productive struggle. In education, we call it the productive struggle, right?
Yeah.
The idea that we want our students to challenge and to work with our material, but not to get it innately and just run with it. Like there has to be some type of a struggle with them so they can feel like they own it and they move on. And I think for our students, if we can get them to do that, then at the middle school, at the high school, or whatever, then when we were talking before, you were talking about being a lifelong learner, then they'll continue that moving on because they want that productive struggle, because they know that that growth happens through that struggle. And then that will pay dividends in their relationships and their careers and just their role as, parents and, and that's what I think ultimately we need in the school system to remember, is that we're not just educating the student for the test, but ultimately these are going to be individuals that are part of our society, part of our culture, that are going to be making decisions. And we want the best informed ones, not the smartest because they passed a test or they got a 5, or they got a 1600 or they write a perfect essay or whatever, but because they see the bigger picture and they understand how the knowledge that they learn today can be applied tomorrow in other circumstances.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
All right. Well, thank you, Austin. I want to thank you again for joining us. I hope we can have you back sometime.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. This is fun.
Right. Excellent. All right. Thank you. Talk to you later.
Thank you.